10. Good morning. The death of baby P is one of the most high-profile tragedies of the past decade. Peter Connelly, the blue-eyed, blonde-haired little boy, was found dead in his cot in the North London borough of Haringey in 2007. A year later, his mother, Tracy Connelly, her boyfriend, Stephen Barker, and his brother, Jason Owen, were convicted of causing or allowing Peter's death. Details of the shocking crime emerged. The little boy had more than 50 injuries to his body and had been seen more than 60 times by health workers, the police and social workers. 2 days before his death, a children's doctor who was standing in as a locum missed the fact that the child had a broken spine. Yet it was really only social workers that were vilified. The case sparked outrage, leading to the then Director of Children's Services at Haringey, Sharon Shoesmith, being sacked live on television by the then Children's Secretary Ed Balls. We'll talk to Sharon Shoesmith in a moment about a book she's written, Learning from Baby P. But first, here's the child's story. The death in 2007 of 17-month-old Peter Connelly, known for so long as Baby P, sparked huge public outrage. His mother, Tracy Connelly, her boyfriend, Stephen Barker, and their lodger, Jason Owen, were jailed for causing or allowing the toddler's death. But much of the criticism was directed at social workers in the borough of Haringey in North London, where the toddler lived and was on the at-risk register. Baby Peter, who was found to have suffered 50 injuries, had long been known to them. In the final 8 months of his life, social workers, police and health professionals made contact with his family on 60 occasions. In July 2007, less than a week before Peter's death, social worker Maria Ward made a pre-arranged home visit but missed injuries to his face and hands after he was deliberately smeared with chocolate to hide them. Days before he died, a doctor missed the fact that Peter had a broken spine. More than 1.5 million people signed a petition set up by the Sun newspaper demanding the sacking of social workers and doctors who failed him. In November 2008, the then Children's Minister, Ed Balls, ordered an inquiry into his death, and a month later, Haringey Council's Director of Children's Services, Sharon Shoesmith, was sacked from her post with immediate effect.
The Haringey Council will now remove the current Director of Children's Services from her post with immediate effect.
An official report in 2010 criticised social workers and their managers, saying they were too willing to believe Peter's mother's claim that her son was injured accidentally. Ms Shoesmith later won a case against unfair dismissal, and it's reported won a payout of over £600,000 after the Court of Appeal ruled in her favour. Well, Sharon Shoesmith is here, former Director of Children's Services at Haringey. Good morning to you. Thank you for talking to us. Let's deal straight away with the accusation that you're cashing in on the death of Peter Connelly by even writing this book.
Well, the book is based on my PhD, which I did at Birkbeck University, and over the years since Peter died, any physical or financial resources I have been used to raise some profile and some awareness of some of the issues around cases like Peter's. I am only this week travelling around the country with an organisation called I Am Social Work, and I'm joining another organisation which is Social Workers Without Borders to try and promote some of the work that social workers do with children across the country. I'm not cashing in. Your little bit of film has talked about 600,000. There was never 600,000.
How much
there was a fraction of that, which I can't reveal because I've signed papers and people would be very ready to tackle me if I did say what it was. It's a fraction of that. And it's 8 years. So any resource I have is ploughed into raising the profile about harm to children.
The book is, you say, about learning from the death of Peter Connelly and trying to understand why the public, why politicians, why the media reacted in the way they did when a number of other children, over 50 other children, died in the same year as Peter Connelly and there wasn't the same reaction. But you were at the heart of it, so I wonder how your book can be seen as objective. You're not an independent observer.
No, I'm not, and that's an issue for anyone who writes a book on a difficult subject. And how you try to deal with that is to provide the evidence. Yeah, and to reference the evidence. And in fact, my book does reference quite a large amount of evidence, some of it which came through the court process. And I am able to stand back and criticise myself with great difficulty, of course, but with the passage of time. I mean, I am a fairly self-reflective person. I am able to do that. But at the heart of this, and at the heart of some of your questions already, is this sense that I'm guilty. Yeah? And I think I have to tackle that one. I'm not guilty.
I've only asked 2 questions. I've got many more.
And both of them had, I think, that undercurrent that I'd done something wrong and that I should be, you know, punished in some way.
You're entitled to your opinion, but perhaps it's just your perception because you're coming from that place, because
yes,
that's how it's been for years.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, for all of these years, yes.
You argue strongly in this book that in this country, when a child dies at the hands of their mum and dad, what society does, more often than not, is blame social workers. And that's what happened, as we know, in the case of Peter Connelly. And your argument is that it's because society cannot cope with the fact that mums and dads kill their own children. Tell us a little bit more about your theory.
Well, it's one of the arguments that I make in the book, that, you know, the whole crime of what I call familial child homicide, you know, often it's a mother, a father, it's an uncle, an aunt who's involved. It is such a repugnant crime, isn't it? It's very, very hard for us to understand how that could happen. When, you know, most of us really cherish our children. It's very hard for that to be understood. And I think that has to be explored. In finding it hard to handle, we tend to blame, we look elsewhere, we look for another reason, you know, who failed this child? And I think the circumstances around Peter's death remain complex. I mean, to this day, we don't know how he died, when he died, or who killed him. Yet we think we know so much about Peter, but he was denied an inquest. So we don't know the answer to any of those questions, even today.
Why do you think, again, your argument, but why do you think it is more palatable to people to blame social workers or another agency, but in this case social workers, rather than put responsibility squarely at the hands, in this case, of the mother, the boyfriend and the lodger? Well,
it's easier in one sense, but also when you look in some depth, as I do in the book, at what happened after Peter's death and after the public knew about Peter's death, which was a year on,
yes,
you've got a real complex interaction between politicians, the media and the public. Yeah? The public were ill-informed and misled from the start, and they were by politicians and tabloid media. I mean,
and what were the kind of misleading things that you say were put out
Cameron
there?
is the first person who kicked this off.
He was leader
in
of
this
opposition
very
at the time.
in this very negative direction. You know, a real example of opportunism. You know, here was an opposition leader desperate to be prime minister, had to bring the Sun tabloid newspaper on his side in order to get votes. Yeah, we know that's how it works. And there's an interaction between him and the Sun, Rebecca Brooks, and that develops into a very challenging interaction, I think, between Rebecca Brooks and Ed Balls in the end. And I cover this in the book in some detail.
But what was misleading? What did politicians and the media put out that was misleading?
The worst of what they put out was that social workers stood by and watched the torture of Peter Connelly. That was how bad it got. That is how desperate it became. And when I use those words, you know, I have shivers running through my body because it was so far from the truth. And, you know, if I say to you that Peter was found dead on a Friday morning, he'd spent the previous weekend with his father, his natural father, and his maternal grandmother. On Monday, the social worker met both the mother and the natural father in a meeting, talking about Peter's future, the fact that he was having this specialist medical investigation on the Wednesday. The next day, he's met in the street. The whole family's met by a health professional who knows the family, and she interacted with them. The next day he goes to see the doctor, Dr. Al-Zayed, and you're little introduction covered that. And you say it's a fact that he had a fractured spine, but we actually don't know that. There's some conflict now between pathologists in what they think was the situation with Peter that day. The next day, the mother's in our offices with the police officers, and they're telling her that they have no case against her. They have no evidence against her, and that they won't press charges the day before he died. And the next day he's found dead.
It feels like it still rankles with you, certainly having read the book, that social workers got all the criticism when doctors, health professionals, the police also made numerous visits to the little boy.
Yes, it doesn't wrangle with me. I think it's something we have to know and understand. I have never used blame against blame. Yeah, blame is not part of my psyche, really. It's not something I've ever used.
But you do in the book. You blame the politicians, you blame the media, you blame the police for private briefing, which you say contributes to misleading the public. You do blame those
I would really
areas.
contest your use of your interpretation. I don't blame. What you find in the book is a real emphasis on understanding, yeah? And I really set that out at the beginning, that we need to stand back and understand what happened here. I need to understand too, yeah? And I need to accept the public's reaction because of what they were told, what they did understand. So no, I would contest that it's blame. It's the serious issue here is how we responded to Peter's death and how we tackle this kind of crime. I give the statistics, and you've quoted them this morning. You know, there's one child every week dies. Now, that is not general knowledge in our population. People don't know that. Yeah, we have a lot of general knowledge about lots of other things, but not this. We don't put that kind of information out there. And I think the serious issue here, and what the book is trying to say, is this is something we have to come to terms with. We have to face this one and try to understand it. And this just simply blaming social workers isn't going to get us anywhere. In fact, it's making the situation worse, because the social work profession is just under siege all of the time. Yeah, it's become, I feel, quite fragile, quite fear of failure. I push social workers everywhere I go to try and join, you know, a single independent professional organisation that can support them and protect them. But if you make such an important profession fearful, which I think is what we've done here. I mean, they meet me and think, oh my goodness, you know, we couldn't believe what happened. We live in horror that is going to happen to one of us. And I have social workers in contact with me, only one yesterday, saying, please, could I talk to you about what's happening to me? And this is happening today, it's happening now. At the same time, I'd want to add, Victoria, that there are these professionals are out there today, and they're at this moment making decisions which are life and death. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's time we faced up to that. It's time we understood it, and it's time we got behind the social work profession.
Okay. I wonder, and you may not like this question, I put this to you. I wonder if your book is looking for conspiracy theories when none exist, arguing that this relationship between the politicians at the time, the Sun newspaper, a bit of briefing from the Metropolitan Police at the time, somehow manipulated the public into thinking that social workers were to blame for Peter Connelly's death, when they knew he died at the hands of his mother. They knew he was on the at-risk register in your borough. They knew his death happened on your watch, and therefore it can legitimately be argued that you should accept some responsibility for that.
Well, there are a number of issues there. If you accept that one child a week is dying in this way, yeah, and that those children will either be on an at-risk register or not, yeah, but they'll exist somewhere and be attached to some local authority or some borough, are we going to sack a director of children's services every time a child dies?
No,
and where would that take us?
Because it is different, because in this case, it was on your watch when the child was subject to a child protection plan.
Yes, but my point still stands, does it not? You know, many children die, and I don't want to, you know, say this lightly. It is a horrific crime, yeah? But it is happening, and the point I'm making to you is, if this is how we're going to react to it, no one's going to do this job. No one's going to be a director of a children's service. I was entirely responsible and accountable in that I followed government guidelines to look in some detail as to what the conduct was of social workers. And I have to remind you that social workers were never struck off by their own regulator. The social workers at the heart of this case are still social workers today, not practicing, but they're still social workers. That gives you some idea of what the issues were for them. But you say conspiracy theory. I took years to come to terms with the evidence that I had obtained through the court system, years to realise what it was and what it was saying. And the most difficult set of documents that I looked at were the 17 drafts of the Ofsted report. And my analysis, which took place over years, and I used other people to look at it and say, is what I have analysed here and written actually what is there, or am I being, you know, imagining this? Which goes to the heart of your question. And they say, no, it's here. The evidence is there, and I make reference to it in my book. And it's allowed me to say, and it's an important point, that the report that Ed Balls is referring to in your clip, that was so appalling, was actually written by Ofsted's top team. It wasn't written by the inspectors who came to Haringey. And it was written by Ofsted's top team in conjunction with some of Ed Balls' civil servants. They were giving steers. Make sure there's a clear attribution of responsibility, because they felt they were dealing with an absolute upsurge of emotion among the public, which they were.
And you argue that once you'd been sacked, effectively, that sort of closed things down.
Yes,
they
thought
took the emotion out of
they
things.
began to feel that there was only one way out of this, and this was to get me, to sack me. And indeed, we now understand, and there's evidence in the Levinson inquiry, that Rebecca Brooks rang Ed Balls. And we're led to believe that this was to say, you know, either sack Shoesmith or we'll turn this thing on you.
Okay.
People have lost their way.
Okay, I want to read some comments. As people have heard you speak this morning, and most of them are essentially, I'll read one, it's representative. This tweet from Phillips, Sharon Shoesmith is overplaying the victim here. It's enough. Tweet from Stephen, when you are head of children's services, then you do have to take responsibility, Sharon. And Paul thinks that you are shameless, his words.
Right, well, I would urge them to read the book and to read what is set out there.
Okay.
Yeah, I respect their views. They were led in a direction with information that simply wasn't.
They might think that's rather a patronising view of them. They are able to make up their own minds.
Well, I think the tabloid media can be incredibly, incredibly persuasive.
And the British public can be pretty bright and intelligent.
Well, I'm quite sure there will be people who would support my view as well. Okay. I haven't come on the programme to dissuade the British public. I respect their view, actually. If what they were told was absolutely true, that social workers stood by and watched the torture of a child, they're absolutely entitled to say everything like that to me again and again.
Thank you very much for talking to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sharon Shoesmith, let me bring you this.